Hidayatullah?
No problem. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. For those of you who are staying behind, if you can come and stay for the Q&A. For those of you who need to leave, no problem, inshallah. And I apologize for those who are praying, inshallah. Yes, please. Brother Nadeem, if you can come up with Brother Atif, because they're going to share their experiences actually using AI in their fields. And I think that's very, very important to show what we need to be doing, inshallah. And then some of you had questions, so please stay behind for that.
My phone is dead, but I'll get to it.
We're going to get, inshallah, started right away. All right, so I'll ask actually Brother Atif and Brother Nadeem to go first so that we can segue, inshallah, into their... One second, just... So we have Brother Atif Qureshi who's going to be speaking to us, inshallah, about how he's using AI in his field of work, and also Brother Nadeem. They're both on the board of the masjid, mashallah, so this teaches a little bit about the community. Allahumma barik.
Assalamu alaikum. Yes, so Brother Atif, I am actually going to talk to you about two things in the way generative AI, I leverage it personally. One is in my role as Community Relations Director, and I'll get to that in a moment. The other is I am the founder of an AI startup called Vistry.ai. About a year ago, we launched Vistry about 4 years ago, and our initial focus was in the computer vision at the edge space. And so a lot of the topics that Dr. Mohammad was sharing around training models for vision tasks, this is taking in, let's say, a camera stream, doing object detection, object tracking, object classification, all these things to make sense and understanding, to essentially have a machine see are the things that we did. So if you go to a Chick-fil-A, all 3,000 Chick-fil-A's actually have a computer vision system deployed, which was based on our software. It scans every piece of protein and potato material that comes out of the kitchen. And essentially what it does in the most simplest explanation is it creates timers. Okay, so it makes observations of when you do a batch and you dump a bunch of fries into a bin, you begin to salt and then ultimately put it into a chute, and it starts a timer. And so in the areas of fast food, it's really important to manage your hold time so your food doesn't get soggy, for instance. So that's a very elegant way of creating a very rudimentary solution to get fresh food and essentially preserve quality. About a year ago, we made a pivot when we saw ChatGPT and the opportunity for generative AI. And so in October of last year, we launched our generative AI platform, initially built on AWS. Alhamdulillah. And so it was very early days, so we had to roll our own software, and I'll describe what that means in a moment. But we were leveraging several foundational models, including Mistral, GPT-4, and others. Our first deployment that we talked very publicly about at the Consumer Electronics Show here in January was a deployment for Formula One. And the area of focus, just to make mention of what we're doing, we're building AI assistants to help employees. And let me just describe why that is. So any employee that has a task that requires specialized knowledge, okay, you can probably think of almost any task, but highly specialized knowledge that is needed to be retrieved in an instant, okay? And so if you think, mashallah, everyone here in the community is a doctor or an engineer or in biotech or what have you, you all have spent many years perfecting your trade craft so that when you get into that moment of like potentially making a diagnosis or you're an ER or what have you, that you make a determination and come to a decision based on information that is available to you. In the same way, we can take an AI assistant and give it information in a very specialized area, and it can give us back a response. And let me just tie that back to what Dr. Mohammad was sharing. What he was describing are foundational models that are trained on large corpuses of information. Think about every word ever produced on the internet. This is a generalized large language model that is very good but can hallucinate and has a tendency to hallucinate. And you'll hear the term supervised fine-tuning and reinforcement learning with human feedback. These are techniques essentially to make the models smarter so you don't see some of the egregious violations that we were talking about. In the areas that my company is focused and where a lot of these enterprise deployments are going is in a technique called RAG, which means Retrieval Augmented Generation. And that's a fancy way of saying, I'm going to give a comparison. Imagine you have something like ChatGPT and it is the smartest human being you've ever met, but it has a tendency to make mistakes when you ask it fiqh issues or areas or questions that are specific to a domain. Now imagine you gave it a book, you gave it the Quran, you gave it a hadith literature and a corpus of information of every word ever produced in the Islamic space, for instance. And then you ask it a question and say, you can only respond to me based on what's in this corpus of information, thus reducing hallucinations. This is the concept of RAG. RAG says that you can take structured or unstructured data, give it to a large language model, and it will infer answers strictly on that corpus of information, but it's using all its reasoning skills to give you an answer. Okay, so you ask it a question in any way. The fact that it's been trained on large amounts of data is important for its understanding, but then it'll reason and only respond based on the type of information you provided it. Okay, let me give you two examples of how that can be applied. In Formula One, 500,000 visitors, and what they do for the 4-day event is they hire a bunch of temporary workers. This Formula One event was in Austin, Texas, so down by the border. 70% of these volunteer workers only spoke Spanish. Okay? Now, what they have to come up to speed on is everything about the venue and its policies. So ADA services, disability services, where water is, where all the vendor stalls are, so on and so forth, where parking is. So imagine you come to a Formula One event and you say, hey, someone fell, I need a wheelchair. And then you ask someone who just literally got hired off the street yesterday and doesn't even speak English. And that's the typical experience. So what we did was we gave them an AI assistant, the actual staff members, and they used it to then respond to questions that were being inquired by the patrons. So if someone said, hey, I want to go to turn 12. By the way, I lived on like turn 9, I think, for that 4-day weekend. If you've ever been to a racetrack, they define it by turns. So when you go and you want to get to your seat or wherever you're going, you want to ask, you always ask, where's turn 9, where's turn 12, I want to get tacos, where can I get that? And this assistant would give access to that specialized knowledge using natural language, both in English and Spanish, and any other language that the patron was seeking. So that's one example of where specialized knowledge using an AI assistant can help augment. And the assistant only responds back based on the information it has about the race. And we provided it information on the drivers, on the history of Formula One, other race events, so on and so forth, as well as venue policies. The second one, a quick show of hands, who here does open enrollment every winter or every fall at their workplace? There's got to be more than one. Okay, a few hands. All right. Now, all of us have gone through this open enrollment period, and it's so tedious and it's so horrible because, especially now, because all the health insurance plans, the premiums are going up, the deductibles are going up, the coverages are going down. You may have a PPO, a HMO, all these acronyms, federal spending accounts, health spending accounts, co-insurance, so on and so forth, okay? So what we're doing with another company is, again, we're focused on the employee value proposition and building assistance to help employees. And this is to support open enrollment. So rather than all these questions being bombarded to the HR team or tickets being put in to the help desk, they get to ask an assistant and essentially ask, hey, what are the plans that are available to me? What are my deductibles for dental, life insurance plans? How do I qualify? My wife needs a new crown. What is that covered? Do I need co-insurance? So on and so forth. And this really improves several things. One, it reduces the inefficiency in the organization because employees get information readily. no one really thinks about HR until they need it, okay? Especially like, I have done several international assignments, and so the rules of relo and international assignments are very tricky, okay? And so an assistant like this can help you navigate very specific situations that are unique to you, but is grounded in information that is constantly changing because of these evolving benefits. So that is the second example. I hope that was helpful in understanding where these can be applied. And so with that, happy to take questions, but I will pass it back.
Jazakallahukhairan. I want to share one more example from my community in Seattle. Jazakallahukhairan, Brother Atif. Again, the title of this talk is Opportunities and Challenges, and these are examples of opportunities that we can capitalize on. I have a friend in Seattle. He runs an educational technology company. And so he produces educational material for different types of students. I met him at the beginning of 2023. His entire plan for 2023, before ChatGPT had come out, he was going to focus on translating his materials into 6 languages. And he thought that he estimated it would take him the whole year to find the right people, get them to work, get the material validated and published using his educational technology platform. He had set his mind on that. He prepared the contracts, found the right people, he'd done all that. And then ChatGPT comes out, and right off the bat, he can translate all of it in a matter of a few hours. All of what he had produced into any number of languages that he wanted. And so it completely upturned his entire plan for his company for the whole year. Now at this point, all he needed was to hire people to just proofread and verify the translation, and he was done. He could reallocate his budget, he could reallocate his headcount, and he could focus on doing bigger and better things. So there's a lot of opportunities, and I talked about the AI friend that your child might have. What if this AI friend was actually somebody that encouraged them to do good and forbid them from evil? Right? So there's a flip side to all of these things. And so I want to get us thinking about these possibilities.
We're going to hear also, inshallah, from Brother Nadeem, who's doing it in particularly in his field of biogenetics.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Nadeem. I work for a pharma company here locally. I work in drug discovery space, and how we can use AI in drug discovery in speeding up the process of drug discovery research. So typically, just to put that example, it takes $1 billion, even more, to put a drug on the market. It takes 10 plus years of research, basic research, to get the drug approved. It's a very complex process, time-wise and money-wise as well. A lot of resources come together to that. So what I'm part of the team is that we are looking into is how we can use AI in the early stages of drug discovery, how we can speed up that process. So we do a lot of, typically in an experimental labs, we screen 500,000 compounds against particular disease. So once we do that, we get a ton of data. When we train that, and using this kind of data, rich data, we train our models, and we create models where we can go back to billions of compounds that could be possibility, and then screen them computationally, and then use this data to predict compound that yes, this compound do have fantastic ability based on this kind of models. So this is what I do as part of my research is, you look into the data. AI has been so much helpful for us to interpret the data, number one. Number two, predict future outcomes of these compounds that could be very interesting. For example, if you have a disease pathway, we look at different pathways, understand what are the critical pain points in this pathway, what are the targets that gets overexpressed. And some proteins get overexpressed in certain disease compared to normal. So it's so much useful using AI to analyze these kind of biological data. And these biological data is really complex data. There's a lot of interplay between these components, these pathways. So it's really helpful in that, from that point of view. A is to interpret the data, B is to predict. And also third, where we do some sort of generative AI where we can predict some compounds, like, okay, based on what I have seen, these are the compound with this kind of transformation might have much better biological properties against a disease particular. So we use some sort of an AI, generative AI as well, to come up with new drugs, come up with new compounds. So this kind of reiteration has been going on, and it's what I do as part of my research at the work I do. And again, it's really helpful the way it has transformed this industry, not just in the early stage, but in the late stage as well. Once you do the clinical trials, how do you select patients? How do you select populations? How do you conduct these kind of studies? And these have tremendous impact on reducing the cost of running these clinical trials as well. So in overall, in that sense, it's really helpful. And I'll take up any questions you may have in that particular space.
Inshallah, just to go to Q&A real quick, I had already, I think, a number of questions. One of them was, can I use AI to do my homework? Is it halal or haram? So the way I answered it is the following. One of the things that goes back to is AI, for example, maybe using or going into copyright infringement or plagiarism, etc. So obviously there's AI is used to counter AI, as you all know. AI generated images can now be verified. And even the craziest thing I saw recently is they can actually pinpoint which AI generated that image. And that's the crazy. So there's one image that was made recently that has to do with something in politics, and they actually pinpointed which AI generated it. So again, this goes back to ethics as well. Islamically, one of the most interesting things I've ever come across when it comes to copyrights and essentially this kind of form of copying is that most Islamic scholars were not bothered by it. And in fact, they thrived on it. The idea that you're taking someone else's work and you're making it better, or you're copying the framework from it and then putting your own spin on it. There's entire works, genres of works in fatawa or works in usul al-fiqh, which essentially that is what it is. They copied al-Ghazali's Mustasfa, for example, literally the whole framework, but then they added the Maliki views or the Hanbali views, etc. So there's nothing wrong with it from an Islamic perspective if you, of course, attribute. You say this was, for example, based on the works of such and such and so on and so. So for example, when it comes to homework, if the whole point of the class, this was a development class specifically for a coding language, if it's made for essentially honing your skills in creating that kind of code, then it would defeat the entire purpose for you to just continuously chat GPT the entire thing, right? By the time it comes to the exam, you can't chat GPT the code. You'd fail. So if it's going against the purpose of the homework, then it goes against using it. But if it's again something you could use that essentially will help you, give you a framework, like we talked about earlier, even about this talk, for example. And by the way, I created my own framework before the talk, all right? So, but even this talk, it gave me a framework, right? Even khatibs can do this. They give you a framework. I want to talk about these 10 subjects. It saves time, for example, to get a framework from ChatGPT, and then, for example, hone it, and people can do that with a million things. It can do that with essays. But again, what is it doing? I personally think that a level of creativity, it's harming. It's a level of creativity that's harming because most of that is, if it's synthesized by a human, it's different. So anyways, but we have, of course, in education now, tons of people which ban the uses of AI because they just want human beings to essentially hone those social skills. So if a teacher's saying you're not allowed to use AI, you're not allowed to create, then it's haram. It's not allowed, right, in that sense. Because you're then cheating. And the Prophet ﷺ said, مَغَشَّنَا فَلَيْسَ مِنَّا, right? Whoever cheats us, then is not from amongst us. And the Muslims, of course, should be the first in not doing so. So you had a question? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Quick comment. Just to piggyback on that, there is one of the emerging concepts in the generative AI space is the use of AI agents. And very similar in the sense of like this champion challenger mindset in which you'll have an agent that does a certain task and you'll have a secondary agent that may use a very different foundational model to essentially challenge what the first agent came up with. And where we have used this in particular is in the areas of data engineering. So historically, a lot of these tasks of like bringing in data and ensuring it's well-formed and then putting that into some semantic structure is done by human beings, right? Data engineers. And so now you can actually take unstructured data, throw several AI agents where the first one will actually try to extract the information. The second one will then do the validation and verification of that data. And if you think of like the traditional ETL acronym, extraction, transformation, loading, you're having AI agents do each one of those pipeline activities. It's pretty fascinating, and it works really well. So yeah, definitely consider that. Last thing to mention, the way I try to teach my kids to use ChatGPT, maybe they don't use it this way, but at least I encourage them, is really as an evaluator. So after you write your essay or after you do your math, throw it up against ChatGPT to then check it or give you suggestions to improve. Don't use it in the creation, the creativity side to generate, use it as an evaluator, and it should, inshallah, help in that way.
Okay, just one quick thing to add. When GPT came out, a lot of teachers instinctively banned ChatGPT for their classes. This is not sustainable. It's not going to work. And so what's going to happen most likely in the future is that the game is going to change. There's a professor at Wharton, his name is Ethan Mollick, and what he does is that he requires his students to use ChatGPT in their essays and their tests. And so he has different kinds of assignments. The assignment is no longer write an essay on this, right? The assignment has changed. The assignment is figure out the best prompt for ChatGPT to write the essay. That itself could take an hour. And then critique it. So the job of the class now is to critique those essays. Or the job is use ChatGPT to come up with 10 ideas and then pick the best 2 of them and tell me why you chose the best 2. Whereas before the assignment might have been come up with 1 idea. And so and I think this will be the way of the future because teachers will recognize that they cannot just ban ChatGPT and expect students to follow it. So the way that assignments are given and evaluated will change. So if you're a teacher, or if you have any teaching capacity at all, or if you advise teachers, this might be an idea you can take to them.
All right, you finally, our first question after 50 days. Good. Go ahead. Of course. Right. 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 Yes. Mm-hmm. Let me preface that because that was some questions I wanted to give to Dr. Mohammed. I want him to answer first, and then I'll put in my 2 cents. I'll preface that's already happening at some level. How many of you guys access Islam Q&A like every week? Almost like everybody access some kind of Islamic bank in the first place. So they're already prompting people's responses to questions that have nothing to do with their particular scenario, but is similar to it, or might be around that answer. This has basically created a different type of problem, and that is that people have kind of separated the notion of you need a human, for example, touch or perspective to people's individual scenarios. This has always been the case for fuqaha. It's called mura'at hal al-mustafti. You have to take into consideration the specific individual situation. This is something AI in full reality can't do in every capacity. Why? I'll give you a simple example. Muhammad al-Ghazali, the great Azhari scholar, some of his students of knowledge who get very caught up always in the nitty-gritty, the technicalities of fiqh, and start arguing about, your madhab is this and my madhab is that. That's what you do when you're early beginner, right? They went to the sheikh, and the famous question, of course, in fiqh, there's a person that does not pray. What is the ruling of that person? There's a huge discussion among the fuqaha. If a person does not pray, is this considered an act of disbelief? Like a person who does not pray at all. So, what do you think ChatGPT would? We could probably put it in and see what it says, right? The scholars differ, and it gives you like a whole thing. There's been a 400-page book written by Ibn al-Jawzi about this, just this. So imagine he has this all in his head. He's summarizing to you in 5 points like it did, and then giving you the array of answers. You know what Sheikh Muhammad al-Ghazali said? He said the ruling is you take him to the masjid. The ruling of the person who does not pray is that you take him to the masjid, bring him to an MCC program, take him to MYSD if they're younger, blah, blah, blah. These kind of pastoral responses, these kind of very much real prophetic kind of character responses. Now, will AI ever pick up on that and be able to give those kind of responses eventually? Possibly. But I don't think to the level of course, again, the separation between human beings and the people that are inputting those responses into AI. We can get very close. In fact, there's many there's psychologists AIs or psychology-based AI programs, and there's ethics based on that. So prompting that, I'll now ask Dr. Mohammed to speak on it, and then I'll give you my perspective as well, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. I'll keep it short, or I'll try to keep it short. The question of whether we should or shouldn't, I think, is past. It's not the point. The point is that people will do it. And so the job of both people like myself, technologists, and fuqaha like Sheikh Hasib, is to make it so that they damage themselves the least. And this is the case with most technologies, right? If you ask me, should a person always ask a mufti in their local area who knows their circumstances? The answer is always yes. But the fact is that people don't have access to muftis where they live sometimes. Maybe they're hundreds of miles away. Maybe they're not accessible. Maybe, something or the other, right? So the fact is this will happen. And it will cause damage because, like Sheikh Hasib said, the job of the mufti goes beyond simply looking at the text and answering a question. It's about the circumstance of the questioner. So how can we make this in a way that is least damaging and most beneficial? So that's the question we should be asking. Now, the answer is that this is already happening. So this is not an endorsement, all right? This is not my endorsement, not Sheikh Hasib's, not this masjid's, but there is an app or website developed by a very sharp scientist. His name is Dr. Walid Qaddus. He made this app called Ansari.chat. You can check it out. It is, again, a RAG-based system, a retrieval augmented generation-based system that is and it's trained on fatwa banks and so on and so forth. And so it's a kind of a happy middle between the lawlessness of an unfine-tuned LLM and a very rigid system like Islam QA, for example. So it does a pretty good job. It does hallucinate at times. It's very, very minimal. It's a good starting point. And I'm sure people will adapt it and build on it and so forth. And then, technically speaking, there's different things you can do, right? So you can take an existing foundation model and fine-tune it. You can take an existing foundation model and build a RAG-based system on it. You can do both of those things. You can build your own foundation model, and this is probably one of the best things we should be doing, so that the things that you're papering over with your RAG and with your fine-tuning are no longer exist in your foundation model you've trained from scratch. So at the level of technicality, there's different things that you can be doing to make the most benefit happen. And as far as I know, unfortunately, the most technical thing we can do is not happening yet, as far as I know, but I think it should.
I don't say piggyback, but anyways, you get it. The point, just to continue what he was saying, I was invited to a conference in Australia by a PhD in Sirah Studies who does exactly this for the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So everything ever written in Arabic, ever, that's in print, that can be digitized, they fed it into an AI model, and they're helping us as researchers to basically produce the research that might be difficult for us to gather. So one of the things that's difficult for us to do is, for example, find all of the instances of the revelation of Surah Al-Ahzab and it's mentioned in every single text. What does that require? I mean, it requires me to look at every single book that has its mention, even in passing. It's very difficult. It takes a huge amount of time. So imagine you have a system which does not make a mistake. It's going to cover every single text and every single reference and then produce it to you at the very least. And then in AI models, what if it also analyzes it a little bit for you too? So they're doing that already. There's a conference in Australia that's going to be focused on this, and I'm focused on one part of it, inshallah, if I go. So imagine doing that with ifta. It's possible. But at the end of the day, like he's mentioned, both of these brothers who it's their actual job, it requires human oversight at some capacity. You can put agents that check, for example, the fatwa. You can see, at the end of the day, a verification from someone who honestly, to someone who's very much trained, it takes a matter of seconds for you to see if there's a mistake in there or not. You can reference it, as one of the brothers, he said, well, make them add references. So it'll say this is washing the knees or wiping over the knees is recommended. Well, who recommended by who? It will give you all the, for example, the resources. So it has the capacity to educate our community, to give people access. But at the end, I think there should always be a big disclaimer at the top, as if it's something that is dependent on scenarios. For example, like divorce cases, what's it called? Custody. Business litigation, whose right was it, who's what, and something we didn't talk about is the element of AI, for example, choosing life and death eventually. right? Who decides how? You might be like, it doesn't make any sense. What if it's in a car and it's in an automatic driving system which already exists in Tesla and you're about to crash? 100% someone's going to die. It's either the driver or these 5 people on the left if it swerves. So who decides that? You understand? So, and by the way, there was a really beautiful podcast, Thinking Muslim. They hosted Riaz Hassan, who focuses on AI, and he talks about this. And Imam al-Ghazali actually spoke about this in his Mustasfa, about how do Muslim scholars define uncertainty. So he's like, it's not a simple question. He's like, if the entire Muslim ummah was like the general mass, right? And 10 people have to die for the betterment of X amount of people, or X amount of people have to die for the betterment of X amount of people. Is it allowed for that to happen or not? In Islamic law, it's not a matter of just yes or no. The uncertainty is defined, it's discussed. What are the variables of that uncertainty? So similarly, like in these situations, we have to plug in when it comes to very, you could say controversial issues, Islamic parameters, and then oversight of a human being at the end of the day. And then even then, some of these issues require councils of humans, not just one. You understand? And this leads to ethics. And at the end of the day, in our faith, we have those parameters. Why do you think that there's such a huge problem among some of these AI ethicists in some of these realms? Because they don't have sometimes parameters. What oversight do they have for AI to be in a romantic relationship with a human being? Even now, like they're talking about AI boyfriends and so on and so forth. In Islam, these are mechanisms, right? And alhamdulillah, we have parameters of using them. Similarly with fatwa. Okay? All right, I think we've maybe stepped the bound, but if there's any other questions for Dr. Mohammad, yes. Okay.
That's really not my area. I don't think I can really add anything, unfortunately. I apologize. Yeah.
I can quickly comment on that. There are companies who are looking into that in terms of integrating the real-time data and then looking at some of the biological parameters over time, and in terms of going into not just that, but going a little bit beyond, like connecting back to the data back to the medical facilities. I'm just you talking about just a glucose as an example, but let's say there's somebody who has some heart disease, so some of those parameters are directly linked, and or for example the mental health, these are directly linked back to the nursing facility. So those sort of things are currently also explored a lot, especially integrating into medical technology companies that are currently looking into. So I mean, there's a ton of work in that's going on. For example, Dexcom in the local, there's a few companies that I can put together. Yeah. Sure, we can connect on that. Yeah. And I would like to hear the second.
Do you have anything to add? Okay. Go ahead. Okay. Okay. Uh-huh. Right. Right. Got it. Right. Right. This is a very good question. This is a very, very good question. The question revolves around developing something that has huge benefits and can also be used nefariously. Or not nefariously, but can be used by people for bad reasons, for reasons that it was not the original intent of the developer. He talked about facial recognition. Facial recognition is being used now by entire governments, where part of your face, for example, can be seen in a camera and they can track you anywhere you go on the earth. It has not been admitted by the United States that they use it, but you know how it is. Anyways, used by other people in the world that are openly saying it. So he was saying like facial recognition software used by, for example, defense companies using, for example, bombs or things like that. So the fuqaha, they actually speak about where some effective cause is directly connected to a ruling or it's disconnected. So if a person works for like some of these companies, etc., and they developing it directly is different from you're sitting there as a computer scientist or a computer software engineer or whatever, a developer, and you're writing code or you're creating this, and then essentially that company creates it and then it disseminates it to the world, which is used by other places. You understand? There's one company, for example. I'm not going to mention who or what, right? But this one of my students, he worked for this company, global company, very well known. And he worked in a sector which had to do with aeronautical engineering, okay? And the problem was that what he was working on was also being used in one particular sector of defense that they would not tell them what it's being used for. You understand? Okay. So they don't know, they don't know what it's being used for. You understand? And he came to me and he's like, look, I'm finding it increasingly difficult because yes, about 60% of our job is for public sector and whatever, but then there's an element here where I don't know what it's being used for. And this is where it's a huge gray area. I as a jurist cannot say this is okay, right? And I cannot also say it's not okay. You understand? That goes back to the individual consciousness of a person. And that led to this individual to basically leave the job and go seek somewhere else where he knows ethically he's not going to be in any area where it's going to be used nefariously. Or at least we could say not nefariously, but used in a way, contradictory to his value systems. This is, by the way, most things. Yeah. Go ahead. Right. Right. Yeah. So it's the same thing. You can add anything to what I'm saying to you. If a person works in an area where we're just developing things, that can be used harmfully by anyone. So am I directly making deals or contracts or serving this cause or not? You understand? It's the same thing of like, okay, do guns people or people kill people? But there's, as you can see with the statement, it's a very controversial statement. I mean, gun laws have to be enacted, so the average dude does not have like a flippin', alhamdulillah, these weapons in the hands of people. But I'm saying to you that at the end of the day, there's individualistic consciousness. The faqih can't give you a decision making here. ChatGPT will never be able to give you decision making if we put these in. Why? Because there's a level of individual consciousness. On a you could say black and white level, there are fuqaha that are very black and white on this. For example, the Hanaf, they're the most easygoing. Why? Because they say you don't have anything to do with this issue. You understand? And the Hanabila and others in Malikiya, they're like, no, you're directly tied to something like that. But that's why we take it back to the individual. If it's something direct, it's very clear. But if it's not, we're just developing technology that's being used. What does that mean? Don't develop? Don't move forward? It's not possible. So at the end of the day, anything can be used for those kind of causes and reasons. I hope this has been giving you some framework of decision making. But at the end of the day, like I said, we're here to essentially guide the conscience of our Muslim population. Allah. And you had something?
I can share my story. Okay, sure. Yeah, so just very briefly, my story. I grew up in Maryland. I was a physics, math, computer science academically. I started at NASA for an internship with Lockheed Martin, the largest aerospace defense contractor, maybe in the world. And After about 16 months, I was working at Goddard Space Flight Center. It was a long commute for me, and I was still living with my parents. So for quality of life, I asked for a transfer. And they said, sure, we'll transfer you. You just have to go through a little background clearance. And 16 months later, I ended up with one of the highest classification, security clearances in the US government. And that started, and then 9/11 happened, and it started a journey that ultimately I didn't feel good about. And so I was torn. I would go to my sheikh probably at least once a month in tears about what I'm doing in the same dilemma, but it was much more intense because of the situation post 9/11. So now you know why I started working for Chick-fil-A, right? Or like, you know, in areas far away from that. And so everyone has their own journey, but my opinion, at least for my experience, was to step away from all that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open other doors. And there's so many places that your skills can be applied. And the things we do ultimately impact, look at the people in Gaza, right? So, you know, we have to be conscious about what we do every day.
We're going to, I think, end it here because it's going to be late. But I do want to add to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, whoever leaves something for the sake of Allah, Allah will always replace it with that which is better. And I want to thank Dr. Mohammad, Brother Atif, and Brother Nadeem for, mashallah, this beautiful discussion. I think we should have more panel discussions, maybe about stem cell research with Brother Ramzi, inshallah. But I think this will be a healthy conversation to eventually build on. May Allah bless you all for staying behind. We'll see you guys on Friday, inshallah, for our continued discussion on icons of leaders of Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh.